The afternoon of January 26, 1945, would forever etch itself into the annals of military history as the day the impossible became reality. In the frozen fields outside Holtzwihr, France, through the smoke and chaos of battle, a scene unfolded that defied every principle of warfare known to military science. Atop a burning tank destroyer, a single American soldier was systematically destroying an entire German company's advance, his methodical precision stopping cold the elite mountain troops of the 2nd G-Bergs Division, veterans specifically transferred from Norway for this crucial offensive. Behind German lines, 6 formidable tanks sat immobilized, their commanders too shocked to advance without the infantry support that was being methodically cut down by what appeared to be a boy who couldn't weigh more than 110 pounds. The mathematics of war painted a stark picture of impossibility. 250 elite German mountain infantry and 6 tanks against 40 exhausted Americans. By every principle of military doctrine, the American position should have been overrun within minutes. Instead, for one impossible hour, 2nd Lieutenant Audie Murphy would rewrite the very rules of warfare itself. The path to that burning tank destroyer began in the cotton fields of Hunt County, Texas, where Audie Murphy was born on June 20, 1925, to impoverished sharecroppers who struggled to feed their large family. As the 6th of 12 children, Murphy's childhood was defined by crushing poverty and overwhelming responsibility that would shape the character of America's future most decorated soldier. When his father abandoned the family and his mother died of endocarditis and pneumonia in 1941, the 16-year-old found himself the primary provider for his younger siblings, a burden that transformed necessity into deadly skill. "If I don't hit what I shoot at, my family doesn't eat tonight," young Murphy had told his neighbor Monroe Hackney, explaining the uncanny marksmanship that would later terrify German soldiers across 3 countries. The boy could drop a running rabbit at 50 yards with a .22 rifle that most people couldn't hit a barn with, each bullet representing money the family didn't have, each miss meaning empty stomachs. Under such relentless pressure, Murphy developed a shooter's eye that would become legendary among both allies and enemies. When Pearl Harbor thrust America into World War, Murphy saw his chance for steady pay, 3 meals a day, and the ability to send money home to support his siblings. Even joining the military proved challenging for the undersized teenager who stood just 5'5" and weighed only 110 pounds. The Marines rejected him as too small, the Navy turned him away, and the Army paratroopers wouldn't accept him. Finally, the regular Army infantry accepted him on June 30, 1942, after his sister provided a falsified affidavit claiming he was 18. Private First Class David Mouse McClure, who endured basic training with Murphy at Camp Walters, Texas, would later recall how they all thought Murphy was a mascot at first. This kid who looked about 14 and weighed nothing, whom the drill sergeants rode mercilessly and called Baby. But there was something unsettling about his eyes. When he was on the rifle range, those baby blue eyes went cold as winter, and he never missed, not once. Murphy's transformation from Texas farm boy to lethal soldier began during the invasion of Sicily in July 1943, when Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, landed at Licata as part of Patton's 7th Army. In the mountains of Sicily, Murphy discovered something that would haunt him forever. He was exceptionally good at killing. His rural upbringing had taught him to move silently, to use terrain for concealment, and to shoot quickly and accurately. Near Palermo, when his unit was pinned down by machine gun fire, Private Murphy worked his way around the enemy position, eliminated the crew with grenades, and turned their weapon on retreating forces. Captain Paul Harris recommended him for the Bronze Star, writing that this soldier displayed a natural aptitude for combat that was extraordinary in one so young and inexperienced. The Italian campaign transformed Murphy from a good soldier into a legendary warrior. At the Volturno River crossing in October 1943, Murphy held off a German counterattack single-handedly when his squad was decimated, using a borrowed sniper rifle to kill 5 German soldiers at ranges exceeding 300 yards, earning him the Distinguished Service Cross. Staff Sergeant William Paulson described Murphy's combat methodology with chilling clarity. Murphy didn't fight angry, which was what made him so terrifying. He fought cold and calculated, like he was doing arithmetic. See a German, eliminate the German, move to the next German, with no emotion, no hesitation, just deadly efficiency. At Enzio, that blood-soaked beachhead Churchill called the Wildcat, Murphy earned his first Silver Star for destroying a German tank with a bazooka at point-blank range. By the invasion of southern France in August 1944, Murphy had survived Sicily, Salerno, Enzio, and Rome, been wounded twice, decorated multiple times, and developed a fearsome reputation among both Americans and Germans. During the drive through southern France, when his lieutenant was killed in an ambush near Montélimar, Sergeant Murphy took command of the platoon, organizing a defense with 18 men against a German company of over 100, holding a critical crossroads for 2 hours and personally accounting for 15 enemy dead. His leadership earned him a battlefield commission to second lieutenant on October 14, 1944. By January 1945, as Company B approached the Colmar Pocket, Murphy was no longer the baby-faced recruit who had joined in 1942. Combat had aged him far beyond his 19 years. He had watched most of his original companions killed or wounded and had personally killed over 100 enemy soldiers. The Colmar Pocket represented everything horrible about winter warfare, an 850-square-mile German bridgehead west of the Rhine, the last piece of French soil the Wehrmacht controlled, which Hitler had ordered held at all costs. The Germans had reinforced it with their best remaining units, including the 2nd Mountain Division, specially trained for winter combat in Norway. For Company B, the situation was desperate. In 5 days of fighting leading up to January 26, they had lost 102 men wounded and all officers except Murphy killed or evacuated. From a full-strength company of 187 men, they were down to 40 effectives, with Murphy himself fighting with a leg wound from shrapnel received 2 days earlier, though he had told no one about it. Private Anthony Abramsky described their condition with stark honesty. They were finished, done, with most having not slept in 3 days, living on cold K rations when they could eat at all, half the men suffering from frostbite, their machine guns freezing up, unable to dig proper foxholes in ground that was like iron. January 26, 1945, dawned gray and bitter cold, with temperatures hovering around freezing and wind that cut through the heaviest overcoats. Snow lay 3 feet deep in places, though constant artillery fire had churned much of the battlefield into a moonscape of frozen mud and ice. Company B held positions along the edge of the Bois de Havre forest, looking out across nearly a mile of open ground toward the German-held village of Holtzwihr. Murphy had positioned his depleted company as best he could, with 2 M10 tank destroyers providing his only anti-tank capability and his infantry spread thin along the wood line. His command post established in a drainage ditch that provided some protection and a good view of the approaching ground. The German attack was preceded by an artillery barrage that began at 1300 hours, with tree bursts showering Company B's positions with deadly fragments for 30 minutes that seemed like hours to the men enduring it. At 1400 hours, the German attack materialized with devastating clarity. Private First Class Donald Ekman was the first to spot them, the pennants on the antennas of 6 German tanks spread out in attack formation, and behind them, an estimated 250 infantry, all in white snow camouflage, moving across that field like ghosts of death itself. Murphy's first action was to call for artillery support, but artillery alone wouldn't stop this attack. The Germans were too spread out, too numerous, and moving too fast. At 600 yards, the M10 tank destroyers opened fire, their first shots missing as crews, numbed by exhaustion and cold, struggled with their weapons. Return fire from the German tanks was immediate and devastating. An 88mm shell struck the rear M10 squarely in the turret, causing the tank destroyer to burst into flames with its crew scrambling out and running for the woods. The forward M10, attempting to maneuver for a better firing position, slid sideways into a drainage ditch, its tracks unable to find purchase on the frozen ground, forcing its crew to abandon it and retreat. At approximately 1420 hours, with both tank destroyers out of action and German infantry closing to within 200 yards, Murphy made the decision that would earn him the Medal of Honor and eternal recognition as America's most decorated soldier. He ordered his remaining men to fall back to prepared positions in the woods, but he himself didn't retreat. Instead, Murphy ran through the artillery fire to the burning M10 tank destroyer, a vehicle fully engulfed in flames at the rear where the 88mm shell had ignited its fuel and ammunition. Black smoke pouring from the hole, with heat intense enough to be felt from 30 feet away, knowing that at any moment the remaining ammunition could explode, turning the vehicle into a massive bomb. Murphy climbed onto the tank destroyer and manned its 50 caliber M2 Browning machine gun, gaining a clear field of fire across the approaching German formations from his elevated position, though he was completely exposed. A single figure silhouetted against the sky with no cover except the smoke from the burning vehicle beneath him. Private First Class Anthony Abramsky watched from the woodline in awe, later recounting how he saw Lieutenant Murphy climb on top of the burning tank destroyer while bursts of machine gun fire and pistol fire from the advancing infantry battered against the hull and treads, calling it the greatest display of guts and courage he had ever seen. The M2 Browning was a devastating weapon in skilled hands, firing 550 rounds per minute with an effective range of 2,000 meters, its half-inch bullets capable of penetrating light armor and tearing human bodies apart. In Murphy's hands, it became an instrument of precise destruction. For the next hour, Murphy operated the heavy machine gun with extraordinary effectiveness, maintaining telephone contact with supporting artillery and calling in fire missions dangerously close to his own position. The combination of his machine gun fire and the artillery he directed created a wall of steel that the German infantry could not penetrate. Sergeant Elmer Broly observed from the wood's edge how the German infantrymen got within 10 yards of Lieutenant Murphy, who killed them in the draws, in the meadows, in the woods, wherever he saw them. The environmental conditions made Murphy stand even more remarkable, with frozen ground preventing proper entrenchment, visibility varying as overcast skies occasionally cleared, and extreme cold affecting weapon performance while leaving soldiers struggling with frostbite after days of continuous combat. Murphy's position on the M10 provided critical advantages that he exploited brilliantly. The tank destroyer sat at a slight elevation overlooking the German approach route, giving him commanding fields of fire, while the 50 caliber's 2,000-meter effective range meant he could engage targets at maximum distance as the burning vehicle's smokescreen prevented accurate German return fire. The German forces found themselves in an impossible tactical situation. Their tanks, expecting to overwhelm the weakened American position, discovered they could not advance without infantry support that Murphy was systematically destroying. Wehrmacht doctrine emphasized combined arms operations, and without infantry to protect them from close assault, the tanks were forced to withdraw rather than risk isolation. Technical Sergeant Morris Wald, observing through binoculars from the battalion command post, later testified that Murphy's fire was incredibly effective. He wasn't just spraying bullets, but aiming every burst, picking off German infantry like he was at a shooting gallery, cutting down an entire squad that was trying to flank their position. At approximately 1500 hours, after 40 minutes of continuous firing, Murphy's ammunition began to run low, the barrel glowing red from heat, as the burning tank destroyer beneath him settled into the ground with its tracks and road wheels melting. German infantry had worked to within 10 yards of his position when Private Charles Owen heard the lieutenant's 50 starting to slow down as he ran out of ammunition. Some of the Germans must have figured it out too because they started rushing forward, prompting Murphy to grab his carbine and start picking them off with that weapon instead. At approximately 1510 hours, with his ammunition nearly exhausted and German infantry closing to within 10 yards, Murphy made the most desperate call of the battle. He ordered the artillery to fire directly on his position. The forward observer, Lieutenant Walter Weisspfenning, initially refused, knowing it would mean certain death for Murphy, but Murphy insisted with a direct order to fire on his position immediately. The first shells landed within 50 yards of the burning tank destroyer, explosions throwing frozen earth and shrapnel in all directions, tearing apart German infantry caught in the open while Murphy, exposed on top of the vehicle, remained in the impact zone as shrapnel tore through his leg, his second wound of the day. Yet he continued firing the few rounds he had left. The combination of Murphy's direct fire and the artillery barrage broke the German attack. The surviving infantry, perhaps 100 men, began falling back toward Holtzwihr while the tanks, without infantry support and facing increasingly accurate artillery fire, reversed course and withdrew. At approximately 15-20 hours, after an hour of continuous combat, Murphy climbed down from the burning M10, his uniform scorched from the heat, blood running down his leg from shrapnel wounds, with the tank destroyer continuing to burn behind him before finally exploding 10 minutes after he abandoned it. The battlefield before him was devastating, with German bodies scattered across the snow-covered fields and military historians estimating 50 dead with many more wounded, the surviving Germans in full retreat with their officers unable to rally them for another assault. Murphy walked back to the woodline where his men waited, and according to Private Abramsky, he was calm, scary calm, asking if they had any casualties from the artillery, making sure everyone was okay, then sitting down and lighting a cigarette like nothing had happened, his hands not even shaking. Perhaps the most striking aspect of historical documentation about this incident is the near-complete absence of German first-hand accounts. Despite extensive research in German military archives, the Bundesarchiv, and veteran organizations, no specific German soldier quotes, diary entries, or testimonies about Murphy's action have surfaced in accessible historical records, a silence that is particularly notable given the engagement's intensity and the shock it must have caused among the attacking forces. Several factors explain this documentary gap. The German units involved suffered approximately 50 casualties from Murphy's actions alone, likely eliminating many potential witnesses. Wehrmacht division-level records from this period were often destroyed in the war's final months, and the rapid German withdrawal following the failed attack, described in American records as disheartened by their lack of progress, suggests a demoralized force unlikely to document what they viewed as a humiliating tactical defeat. The German units have been identified through operational records as the 2nd Mountain Division, providing the primary infantry force, supported by elements of the 708th Volksgrenadier Division and the 285th Assault Gun Battalion. Elite formations with the mountain troops being veterans with extensive combat experience, making their failure against a single defender all the more shocking to German tactical expectations. The 2nd Mountain Division's war diary for January 26 notes only that an attack on American positions near Holtzwihr was repulsed with heavy casualties and enemy resistance heavier than expected, a terse entry that belies what must have been happening among the German ranks. Elite mountain troops who had fought in Norway, Finland, and the Eastern Front had never encountered anything like this. A single soldier who seemed immune to fear, fatigue, and the basic human instinct for self-preservation. Post-war German military analysis included the battle in their study, Verteidigung gegen Überlegenheit, Defense against superior forces, published in 1965, identifying several factors that contributed to their defeat: overconfidence based on numerical superiority, tactical inflexibility when the initial assault was stopped, and the failure of combined arms when tanks and infantry failed to coordinate effectively. The German forces never attempted another attack on Company B's position. That night, under cover of darkness, they withdrew from the sector entirely. Elite mountain troops, who had been specifically brought from Norway for this offensive, soldiers who had never retreated in 4 years of war, withdrew without orders from their corps commander. The psychological impact of being stopped by a single American soldier was more devastating than the physical casualties, and Murphy's stand at Holtzwihr had consequences far beyond the immediate tactical victory. The successful defense enabled the 3rd Infantry Division to maintain its hold on the critical Bois de Havre forest, which dominated the approaches to Holtzwihr village. The German failure to break through meant the Colmar Pocket's days were numbered, with Holtzwihr itself falling to the 30th Infantry Regiment the following day, January 27, 1945. Within weeks, the entire German bridgehead west of the Rhine had been eliminated, removing 50,000 German troops from the war and freeing Allied forces for the final assault into Germany. The engagement demonstrated that even elite German formations could no longer overcome determined American resistance, regardless of numerical superiority. General Jean de Latter de Tassigny, commander of the French First Army, recognized the importance of the action, stating that the defense of the Holtzwihr approaches by the American 3rd Division, particularly the extraordinary action of Lieutenant Murphy, broke the back of German resistance in Alsace. The tactical lessons from Murphy stand, particularly the effectiveness of combined artillery and automatic weapons in defense, influenced American tactical doctrine for the remainder of the European campaign. French recognition came through the 3rd Infantry Division being granted the right to wear the French fourragère in 2000, and a memorial was erected at the battle site to ensure that French citizens would remember the young American who helped liberate their homeland. The official Medal of Honor citation presented by Lieutenant General Alexander Patch on June 2, 1945, provides the military's formal recognition of Murphy's achievement, though the citation's language, typically understated in military documents, struggles to capture the extraordinary nature of the action. The citation notes that he was alone and exposed to German fire from 3 sides, but his deadly fire killed dozens of Germans and caused their infantry attack to waver, and for an hour, the Germans tried every available weapon to eliminate 2nd Lieutenant Murphy, but he continued to hold his position. The award ceremony near Salzburg, Austria, brought together surviving members of the 3rd Infantry Division to witness their comrade receive the nation's highest military honor, with Brigadier General Ralph B. Lovett and Lieutenant Colonel Howlett D. Edson, who had recommended Murphy for the medal, emphasizing that Murphy's action had saved Company B from certain destruction and enabled the division to hold critical terrain. Murphy's reluctance to view his actions as heroic remained consistent throughout his life, and when asked why he had climbed onto the burning tank destroyer, his response was characteristically direct. "They were killing my friends." It was not a heroic act. "I figured if one man could do the job, why risk the lives of others?" Murphy's post-war struggle with what was then called battle fatigue, now recognized as PTSD, makes his story particularly relevant to modern understanding of combat's psychological toll. He suffered from chronic insomnia, recurring nightmares, and hypervigilance that led him to sleep with a loaded pistol under his pillow, eventually moving to sleeping in his garage with the lights on, unable to tolerate darkness that reminded him of night combat. "I remember the experience as if I do a nightmare," Murphy wrote about his combat experiences. "A demon seemed to have entered my body." His willingness to speak publicly about these struggles led to legislation creating the Audie Murphy Memorial Hospital in San Antonio in 1973, 2 years after his death in a plane crash at age 45. Murphy's first marriage to Wanda Hendricks lasted only 16 months, destroyed by his PTSD episodes, with Hendricks later describing how he was 2 people. During the day, he could be charming, funny, and generous, but at night he became someone else, patrolling the house with a loaded gun and sleeping in the garage with the lights on because darkness reminded him of night patrols. Despite his own struggles, Murphy became an early advocate for veterans suffering from combat-related psychological injuries, writing for the Saturday Evening Post in 1966. "I can't remember when I didn't have nightmares. They became part of my life, like breathing, but I was lucky. I could afford doctors' medication therapy. What about the veteran who can't? What about the thousands coming back from Vietnam with the same problems?" Murphy's effectiveness at Holtzwihr was amplified by the weapon systems he employed. The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun, designed by John Browning in 1918, was arguably the finest heavy machine gun of World War II, with its 50 BMG cartridge capable of penetrating 1 inch of armor plate at 100 yards and each round having devastating effects on human targets. The bullet's energy of over 13,000 foot-pounds at the muzzle literally capable of tearing a human body apart. The M10 tank destroyer carried 51 rounds of 3-inch ammunition in its hull along with 1,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition and 300 gallons of gasoline. When the German 88mm shell struck, it ignited the fuel, creating a fire that reached temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And the fact that the vehicle burned for over an hour without a major explosion was miraculous. Murphy was essentially standing on a bomb with a lit fuse. The artillery support Murphy directed was equally crucial. The 105mm howitzers could fire a 33-pound high-explosive shell over 11,000 meters, with each shell creating a blast radius of 50 meters and shrapnel lethal to 200 meters. Murphy's ability to adjust this fire to within 50 yards of his own position, danger close by any standard, multiplied his combat power exponentially. Military scientists have attempted to calculate the probability of Murphy's survival at Holtzwihr, and given the German forces engaged, 250 infantry with rifles and machine guns, plus 6 tanks with main guns and coaxial machine guns, approximately 10,000 rounds were fired at Murphy's position during the 1-hour engagement. Even assuming poor marksmanship due to range and Murphy's concealment by smoke, statistical models suggest Murphy should have been hit 15 to 20 times. The physical demands of operating the M2 Browning under these conditions were extreme. The weapon weighs 84 pounds and has violent recoil, requiring Murphy to maintain his balance on the burning vehicle while absorbing the weapon's recoil, all while being shot at from 3 directions, with the smoke from the burning vehicle making breathing difficult and aiming challenging. Military historians and psychologists have long debated what made Murphy capable of such extraordinary combat performance. Was it his impoverished background that taught him survival at any cost? His hunting experience that made killing seem natural, or simply being in the wrong place at the right time? Dr. Dave Grossman, author of On Killing and a leading expert on combat psychology, offers this analysis. Murphy represented a perfect storm of factors. He had the technical skills from hunting, the motivation from poverty, the emotional detachment from early trauma, and most importantly, a protective instinct toward his men that overrode self-preservation. This interpretation is supported by Murphy's own words when asked why he climbed onto the burning tank destroyer. He consistently gave the same answer: "They were killing my men." The personal nature of that statement reveals Murphy's motivation. This wasn't about tactics or strategy, but about protecting the soldiers he commanded. Murphy himself recognized the transformation combat had wrought in him. In a 1968 interview, 3 years before his death, he reflected, "People talk about that day like it was heroic. Maybe it was, but I became something inhuman that day. I turned into a killing machine. I felt nothing. No fear, no anger, just a cold determination to destroy." Audie Murphy's military record remains unmatched by any American soldier. He received every combat decoration for valor that the United States Army could award, some of them twice, with his 33 decorations including the Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, Legion of Merit, 2 Bronze Stars, and 3 Purple Hearts, plus 5 decorations from France and Belgium. But Murphy's true legacy lies beyond medals. His advocacy for veterans' mental health was decades ahead of its time, with the Audie Murphy Memorial VA Hospital specializing in treating PTSD and other combat-related psychological injuries, and his autobiography, To Hell and Back, helping thousands of veterans realize they're not alone in their struggles. Murphy's story has become embedded in American military culture, with the U.S. Army Infantry School using his action at Holtzwihr as a case study in defensive operations, leadership under fire, and the integration of supporting arms. The Audie Murphy Club recognizes exceptional NCOs who demonstrate leadership qualities similar to Murphy's. Master Sergeant Ronald Johnson, president of the Fort Hood Audie Murphy Club chapter, explains the continuing relevance. Every generation of soldiers needs heroes, examples of what's possible when ordinary people face extraordinary circumstances. Murphy shows our soldiers that you don't have to be 6 feet tall or come from a military family to be a warrior. You just have to care more about your buddies than yourself. Military professionals often debate whether Murphy's stand could be replicated in modern warfare, noting that technology has fundamentally changed combat. Satellites, drones, and precision munitions have created a transparent battlefield where individual heroics seem impossible. Yet recent conflicts suggest otherwise, with American forces in Afghanistan and Iraq repeatedly witnessing individual soldiers performing extraordinary acts reminiscent of Murphy. Staff Sergeant David Balavia's house-to-house fighting in Fallujah and Sergeant First Class Paul Smith's machine gun stand in Baghdad all echo Murphy's willingness to face impossible odds. General Stanley McChrystal, former commander of Joint Special Operations Command, argues, "Technology changes war's character, but not its nature. War ultimately remains a contest of human wills." What Murphy demonstrated at Holtzwihr, the willingness of one person to say no further regardless of odds, that's timeless. At the U.S. Army's Maneuver Center of Excellence, Murphy's action teaches several critical concepts: the importance of position, the integration of fires, and the psychological dimension of combat. Murphy understood that killing enemy soldiers wasn't enough. He had to break their will to fight, and his relentless, accurate fire convinced the Germans that advancing meant certain death. While the world celebrated Murphy as America's most decorated soldier, the young Texan was fighting a different war, one against the demons that followed him home. The man who had shown no fear atop a burning tank destroyer was terrified of the darkness in his own mind. Murphy's widow, Pamela Murphy, who married him in 1951 and remained with him until his death in 1971, provided unique insights. Audie carried invisible wounds that never healed. He'd wake up screaming, reliving battles from 20 years earlier. But he never stopped trying to help other veterans. The war never ended for Audie, but he turned his pain into purpose. This transformation of trauma into advocacy created lasting change. Murphy's public discussion of PTSD helped establish recognition that combat stress was a legitimate medical condition requiring treatment, not a sign of weakness or cowardice. And his advocacy helped thousands of veterans seek help they might otherwise have been too ashamed to request. On January 26, 1945, Second Lieutenant Audie Leon Murphy proved that one determined individual could stop an army, and his stand at Holtzwihr shattered German assumptions about American soldiers. These weren't the soft, pampered boys of Nazi propaganda, but the sons of farmers and factory workers, shaped by depression and hardship, who could be as hard as any warrior in history when defending their friends. The silence in German records about that day speaks volumes, representing in their inability to explain or understand what happened the deepest form of defeat, not just tactical or physical, but psychological and moral. They had met someone who was simply better at war than they were, and that recognition broke something fundamental in their warrior identity. Today, the field outside Holtzwihr is peaceful farmland again, with the scars of battle healed, the shell craters filled in, and the blood washed away by decades of rain. But on January 26th each year, a small ceremony is held at the memorial marking Murphy's stand, where French citizens, American veterans, and occasionally elderly Germans gather to remember the day one American soldier proved that courage has no limits. Murphy's story reminds us that heroism isn't about being fearless. Murphy was terrified by his own admission, but about acting despite that fear when others depend on you, about making a stand when retreat would be easier, about becoming for one crucial moment larger than yourself. In the end, that's why the Germans were shocked when one American soldier held off 250 Germans for over an hour alone. They had encountered something that military science couldn't explain, that tactical doctrine couldn't counter, that overwhelming force couldn't overcome, the unconquerable human spirit embodied in a 110-pound Texan who would rather die than let his friends be killed. His stand at Holtzwihr remains eternal testimony that one person at the right place and the right time with the right motivation can change everything. The boy who hunted rabbits to feed his family became the man who stopped an army to save his friends. And in war, as in life, that transformation from the ordinary to the extraordinary remains the most shocking truth of human nature, that within the most unlikely among us lies the capacity for greatness that can alter the course of history itself.